Aloha and welcome to MauiManao, our question and answer show featuring the Maui Senate delegation. I am your host, Alan Teixeira, and welcome to the second episode of the 2015 legislative session. Joining us again are the Maui State Senators, Senator Ross Baker, Senator Jake Lani English, and Senator Gilbert Keith Akaran. Welcome, Senators, and thank you so much for joining us again.
Aloha.
Aloha. Well, we have reached the conference portion of the 2015 session. Can we discuss some of the interesting legislation that's moving through conference this year? I mean, I know there's a lot, but feel free to discuss whatever you like.
We're just starting naming conferees, and probably the budget conference will start next week, and the individual bills will start conferencing next week. And for people that don't know, that just means that the House has passed its bills over to the Senate's passed its bills over to the House. We've each had a chance to amend and look at them. And then conference time works out the differences between the two versions. So we have to come up with one measure that can go up to the governor that's exactly identical. So we don't take any more testimony, we don't have any public participation, although they can observe conference. It's really an opportunity, say, between my Consumer Protection Committee and anybody else that the bill was referred to on the Senate side, and probably on the House side would be Commerce and Consumer Protection, CPC on the House side, and any other committees that were on that bill. So it's a little different part of the Senate, but it's the way we resolve our differences and finally get bills to final passage.
So a conference committee is usually made up of the managers on each house that worked on the bill as it went through. So, generally if it was, let's say, a transportation bill, and then it went to the Ways and Means Committee, it would be the chair of the Transportation Committee, usually the chair of the Ways and Means or someone from Ways and Means, maybe the minority member on the committee for the Senate, and the House would have a similar delegation. They would get together as one committee called the Conference Committee to work out the differences, and it's some of it is very conceptual, like big differences, and others are really small things like a comma, but a comma can change the meaning of a sentence, so that's why we work out those differences.
I've heard too that the House doesn't capitalize state and the Senate does.
Yeah, and then there's a reviser of the statute that does it how it's supposed to be done. So this year we've decided that we're going to just let the reviser of the statutes do it however they want, and we're going to stick to the substantial changes.
And sometimes there's a disagreement exactly on what's substantial and what's not, right? For example, I think on the medical marijuana bill, part of it is very philosophical. The approach that the Senate Health Committee seems to be is they want to have these set up as soon as possible. I think the House seems to be a little bit more deliberate. They're willing to wait for the Department of Health to do some rulemaking. And so they're talking about, any time between this 2 to 4 year time period to have the first set up. And, we've been waiting for dispensaries for when was the program set up?
2002?
Yeah,
2000.
Yeah, something like that.
2000.
So some bills, I think, look like they're going to be a lot easier to work out in conference than others. And I think that's one that I think a lot of people are watching, but I think there may be some challenges.
Well, because it's such a controversial topic, because marijuana is not legal according to the federal government, even though we've had a medical marijuana program for a number of years, we set up a task force of stakeholders from around the state to really try to figure out and hash out some of the issues that confront setting up a dispensary program. How much do you charge? How many will there be? What are the parameters, the security? How do you get it from one place to the other? And so the stakeholder group was very, very helpful in giving us some ideas and developing some consensus. But of course, when it comes to the legislature, people have other ideas that they want to put in. And Maui County has a unique situation because we're 3 islands, habited islands, separated by water, and you can't, TSA will confiscate if you get on an airplane with it and have to go through that kind of security. So it's going to be a little bit more challenging because Lanai is so small. Molokai is small as well, and probably could not sustain a dispensary on their own. So, how do we make sure that those folks who may need medical marijuana for pain or nausea or whatever, have access to it. And that's just one of the unique things about representing Maui County on some of these laws.
The canoe
And there's
district.
some other interesting situations within the bill. I mean, you know, for example, are there criminal fines or should there be civil fines? And you know, if you look at the trend in the country, many states are heading towards legalization of marijuana. Other states already have dispensaries in place. So now we're looking at what's called best practices, how other states are doing it, things that they've done right, things that they may have done wrong. So we have that to draw from. And you know, one of the things is, you know, if we criminalize some of these things, then you know, then we've created other problems. For example, we have overcrowding in the prisons, et cetera, et cetera. So these are some of the questions that the conference committee is going to have to grapple with.
And Senator Keith Agaran is one of the conferees, the lead conferees for the Senate, who will be negotiating with the House to see what we can come up with.
I'm not the lead though, so.
No, you're not the lead, but you're
But I am going to be
very
looking,
important.
right, I will be looking closely at the penalties because some of the drafts that I've seen seem to have decided that some penalties associated with dispensary, even though it's basically for doing the same things under a regular penal code, have a lesser offense. So they're turning what normally would be a misdemeanor or a C felony into a B or A felony because it's associated with a dispensary. And that's part of the discussion I think that we're going to have in conference.
But see, that's sort of an example. This bill is a good example of how the different committees have different jurisdiction. I think, if I recall correctly, this was a health, JDL, so health, judiciary and labor. And Senator Keith Agaran chairs the judiciary and labor, so he's probably not looking at the health aspects of the measure so much as he's looking at how it fits into the judicial framework and fines and other kinds of things of that sort, as well as, you know, the labor aspects of who is licensed, who's not licensed, who can have access to certain things.
And then the budget committees also
that's right.
have a piece of this as well.
Right.
If we could talk, if we could talk about the budget a little bit, HB 500, HD1, SD1, the state budget. I mean, let's talk about the Senate's priorities for Hawaii this year.
Wow.
I know it's a huge bill.
You know, I think maybe we'll start with some of the more common things that were out there. You know, it's a negotiation process, so we put a lot of monies back in to, I know we had a lot of emails, a lot of calls about the environmental issues, right? Funding invasive species, funding the HIS programs, Hawaii Invasive Species programs, funding doe care, funding those types of things. So, you know, we provided a lot of funding for that in the Senate version. The House version of the bill took out that funding. So, you know, this is throughout the whole budget, we're going to be comparing what both the House and the Senate did. And if we did the same thing, then it's an agreement. We agree that should be. If the House has one thing and the Senate has another, then it's a disagreement, and we have to talk about those. So there's literally thousands and thousands of pieces like that in the budget. And when we get to the budget conference, it's going to, well, it used to be binders this thick. Now now we're electronic, so we have it all on computer. But it's really literally lining everything up and seeing where we have disagreement. So the Senate restored a lot of things. We had a little bit of more money to work with. I think we've tried to consolidate some things. So what the Money Committee did was, for example, all of the IT things across all of the departments. Instead of funding each department and each separate program, consolidated all of it and said, okay, we're giving authority to the governor to control all of this and $10 million to implement it across the whole of government. So instead of, let's say, transportation saying we're going to do one thing and Department of Education doing another and DBED doing another, we're trying to get a consolidated approach. So that the Senate did that in the budget as well. Anything?
Well, I think one of the other big philosophical differences between the Senate budget that we approved and the House budget is what they're doing with the University of Hawaii. I think that the budget that the House proposed was going to be a lump sum, and that didn't differentiate among the different campuses that have different needs. Now we have UH Maui College, and we know that UH Maui College is different from Manoa, and yet most of these decisions are going to be made in the House budget by the Manoa-centric budgeting office at the university. So I don't think that that necessarily is something, it might be worth discussing, but I'm not sure if that's the approach that we want to take. And I believe that the Senate budget does try to make sure that the basic needs of UH Maui College are going to be met in our budget.
I know one of the items that was included in the Senate version of the budget for UH Maui College is funding to continue with the Food Innovation Center. And that's really very important for food security, for assisting our farmers to try to make sure that they can have access to a facility that will help them with their value add. You know, we had a great Ag Fest just a few weeks ago, and lots of producers came. Farmers were talking about some of their issues and concerns, and then sharing some best practices, as well as some of the tasty treats in partnering with some of our great chefs that we have on Maui. So the Food Innovation Center, we started it last year with some planning money, and I think this budget has some construction money in it. So hopefully we'll be able to keep that and some other important Maui items in there. But you know, we talk about the budget, and we always talk about the executive budget, and that's what we're discussing now. And it is a major policy document, but there are at least 2 other budgets that have an impact. We do a separate one for the judiciary, so any courthouse money as well as operating money, and sometimes we put grant and aid money in the judiciary budget specifically for sex assault and domestic violence. But we also have the OHA budget, and so that's a third policy document that allows these other branches of, well, the other branch of government, the judiciary, as well as the important Office of Hawaiian Affairs, their recommendations for what they'll be able to spend for the next fiscal year.
You know, one other thing that we did in the budget this year was we started moving positions from special funds to general funds. And that's, you know, that's a policy call that's going to start showing out in the next couple of years. But for example, Hawaiian Homes, you know, we've taken over their base personnel is now coming from general funds. The idea is that, okay, we'll take on that part, and that frees up other funds for them to do program. There's some other departments that have, I forget which one, we did it in a couple departments. But anyway, the idea is to start moving positions off of special funds and into general funds.
I think one of the concerns with that was that oftentimes if you say, well, the program's specially funded or these people are specially funded, they don't get quite as much scrutiny as if they're generally funded. And I'm hoping that whether we leave them in special funds or we move them to general funds, that the committees that have jurisdiction over those programs will sort of get the message and begin to take a greater interest no matter how the program is funded, because in the final analysis it's coming from taxpayers someplace, whether it's a fee or whether it's through the general fund. So we want to make sure that all aspects of government are working well and being very efficient and delivering on the mission that they were designed to.
And you know, we can't forget the fourth budget that gets passed, which is the legislative budget.
Yes.
And that one gets passed early so that the legislature can operate
and pay our staff.
And pay our staff. And if, you know, in the past, we would actually, the staff would not get paid until the budget was passed. And that used to create a real hardship. So, you know, we actually create a little bit of carryover monies to cover the first few weeks of the legislature until we can pass the budget.
Now, what you're not going to see in any of the budgets, though, is the grants and aid that are going to be approved, and that's usually one of the last things that gets done, assuming that there's money available. And we know that there's a lot of community groups from Maui who have applied, and so they're sort of, this is the time of year now where they're just sort of waiting to see if they're going to be able to make their budgets, because a lot of them depend on support from the state and from the county.
Yes, it's pins and needles time for those folks. And you know, I've even had people call and say, well, what's the strategy for, you know, for getting our grant and aid, or what's the strategy for coming out of conference? And there really isn't one. You know, they put in their grant and aid, they've all been scrutinized, we all support everything that we can for Maui, but it really comes down to, is there enough money that can be put aside for grants and aids, whether they're operating grants and aids or capital improvement ones. And I know we're all joining all of those good folks from Maui, keeping our fingers crossed that there'll be some, and some of those funds will come to our community associations.
And we're hoping that there's some monies at the end. You know, that's what happens, is that after all the agencies are funded, state government is funded, then if there's something at the end, then we look at the grants and aid. So, you know, Senator Baker is absolutely correct. We're getting all the calls and people coming in, you know, briefing us on their grant and aids, asking for updates. But frankly, we don't know either until the final days if there's anything left.
But Senator English is the only one of the
That's
three
right.
of us who sits
That's
in the
right.
committee, on the Ways and Means Committee. So if you have really a lot of questions, we will refer you to his office.
And I'll send you to one of these two offices.
How nice, how nice.
No.
Actually, speaking about Maui, are there any particular hot topics close to home that you would like to highlight or address?
Probably the biggest one is what's going to happen with Maui Memorial Medical Center. Senator Keith Agaran just led the second piece of that discussion when we were considering House Bill 1075. That's the vehicle that we will be using to address the issue of the public-private partnership with Maui Memorial and HPH at the moment, because it sets up that framework. So I'm going to ask Senator Keith Agaran if he would share a little bit about what's in the Senate position as we're going to conference.
Well, I think what we wanted to do was to have a bill that really was just a framework. So it's pretty scaled down, so it just sets a structure. It does address a couple of important things I think that they wanted, that both parties wanted to see in a bill. One is the length of time for any kind of operating lease. Secondly, setting up what would be the process and the standards that would be followed if a subsidy were applied for, whether it's operating or construction. And what we decided, both the Ways and Means Committee and Judiciary, was that we would basically have the same kind of standards that anyone coming to the legislature for a grant and aid would need to fulfill. And that makes sense, because they will no longer be a state operation, and so they should be treated like anyone else that comes to us. And again, there is no guarantee that they will get that support. We were just talking about GIAs. If this transaction goes forward, they will be in the same boat, basically, as anyone else applying for a GIA. And that's part of the risk that the private partner is going to have to take, that if they do enter into this agreement, it's no sweetheart deal. They really need to meet these standards and convince the legislature that it's worthwhile for us to give them this operating subsidy or even a capital improvement subsidy.
So that really ensures and guarantees that there is continued oversight by the legislature and by the executive, because we'd all have to sign off on that. And I think the other thing that, you know, we kept hearing that people were concerned about what was going to happen to the employees. And there is a guarantee in both state and federal law that there will be some continuity. But I think, you know, as we transition, we know that if we don't go to a public-private partnership, there will be cuts in services on Maui. There will be loss of jobs. We believe that by moving to a more sustainable model, by partnering with another entity that runs hospitals very well, that we can keep the services on Maui, we can keep the jobs on Maui, and we will be able to have a sustainable healthcare system that will continue to provide high-quality services for our residents and anybody who happens to be visiting our island. It's very important to us that we have a good quality hospital on Maui.
And it's no secret this process has been going on for a while.
Yes.
And I think that anyone who suggests that maybe the region is not listening or HSSC is not listening probably doesn't understand that one of the big objections to the proposed transaction with Banner was the question of, why don't you look at partnering with a local company
Right.
that has local roots, that is committed to healthcare in the islands? And right now they were talking to Kaiser Permanente, who did that, and then Hawaii Pacific Health. HPH right now is the last of the possibilities still standing. If this passes, it doesn't guarantee that they will reach an agreement, either with HPH or perhaps someone else. But the framework is going to be set up if this bill is passed.
I think it gives us the best possible opportunity to be hopeful about the future for healthcare on Maui. And we know that HPH was able to go to Kauai and help Wilcox stabilize and assist them. So it's not that they're just an Oahu-centric healthcare system. They do understand rural healthcare and have been successful with Wilcox on Kauai.
And this also includes the Lanai Hospital.
That's right.
And the
Kula.
Kula Hospital. So, it's a system, the three entities in Maui County, and it affects all of us living in the islands. So that's why it's been really the top priority for us to make sure that we have continuity of care, that we actually have care on Maui, that we have a medical facility no matter what it takes to keep that operating. And it's taken a lot of, how do I say this, a lot of foresight and a lot of dedication by everybody involved to make sure that we have something. So, moving forward, we're hoping that the medical community in Maui will stabilize, that we will have good medical care going forward. I think we have good medical care now, and to maintain that and keep that going, that's the goal.
Now, I think we're all mindful that with the reality being so stark, we understand that people who are currently public workers probably have a lot of anxiety about what this means for them. One thing that I guess we were somewhat comforted by is HPH does have three of their hospitals are unionized. I think the fourth hospital, I think the workers there voted not to unionize. So we understand from discussions with HPH that they intend to have a unionized workforce. And so, yes, a lot of these employees will no longer be public workers if this transaction goes forward, but I think we are confident that we won't be losing union jobs.
And there are actually unions that we're very familiar with. ILW, UPW as a private union, not a public union, Teamsters, and the Hawaii Nurses Association. So, and many of those organizations have great track records for advocating for their members and getting them good contracts. So I think while change is difficult and it's never comfortable, and there is a level of anxiety around any kind of venture like this one, I agree with Senator Keith Agaran that we're comforted because we know that there will be folks that will really help to look out for employees, as well as trying to structure something in the process that's going to take care of the employees as well, even though they will be transitioning from being a public employee to a private employee.
Is there any other particular legislation that you guys would like to discuss? We mentioned marijuana, we mentioned marijuana dispensaries, and Maui Memorial. There's a lot of bills still moving.
There's some. Let's talk about some bills that didn't make it. That was good for us. You killed a particular bill that would have banned cesspools.
Well, I think a lot of people probably misunderstand what I did, because I think a lot of us know that the Department of Health, for example, already has the authority to decide whether to allow cesspools, and they tried to do that by rulemaking. But they tried to do it by rulemaking only on Oahu without coming to the Big Island or to Maui, where most of the people are who had been affected by it. So for me, I looked at that bill as trying to get around the fact that they don't want to come and meet the people who are going to be affected by this in their rulemaking. To me, you have the authority, go do the rulemaking. I think we all agree that the goal is good. We all agree that cesspools located in the coastlines or above aquifers probably shouldn't be allowed. And we all did agree, though, that the bill that's going forward now to provide a subsidy if you want to switch, if you want to transition to a septic system, is something we all approved and we all supported.
So there's a House bill that the Senate amended, and what we did was we the numbers were staggering. There's about 100,000 cesspools in the state of Hawaii, and if we did a tax credit for a conversion, I think the number that came back to Ways and Means was like $43 million. So we had to bring it down. What we did was we looked at 200 feet from the coastline and 200 feet from an aquifer, and we looked at the cesspools that would be on that. It came out to about 6,800. And then we said if 10% of that would apply for this credit every year. So we came up with the amount of $10,000 as a tax credit if you convert a cesspool to either hook onto the municipal system, if that's not available, convert it to a septic system. An average system on Oahu, I have to stress on Oahu, an average system costs about $20,000. So the tax credit is generous, but it's enough to help a family in the rural area make it worth their while to convert. It helps us now to make sure that the waters remain clean, that the aquifer remains clean. So it's a general public health. It supports the general community and the health of the waters, as well as supporting our families. Now we had to cap that at $5 million a year to keep the budget in check. But we hope that the House agrees with this, because if they do, then we have a system now to help those people that are within 200 feet of the coastline or 200 feet from an aquifer to convert. And I think that this is the approach. First, we help people to convert. We stop allowing cesspools going forward, which we've already have stopped. Some of the other things, though, we have a Senate bill that's moving through that's, I just saw today pass the House, so it's going to go to conference, and that's Senate Bill 878, which is wastewater. It allows the counties to approve and the use and the installation and use of composting toilets. So this is for very remote areas where there's no municipal water.
Right.
There are things like Kalalau Trail in Kauai where they used to have composting toilets, and now they have to use porta potties, fly them in and fly them out. So this is one area that Maui County's had a lot of reaction to, and we've been working hard to make sure we have some systems in place to deal with the conversion.
We have about 2 minutes left, Senator, so anything else you want to highlight before we run out of time?
I just wanted to mention that we also have given the counties the ability to better manage their wastewater, or their stormwater runoff by putting some fees in place that would give them the ability to really manage it in a much better way and come up with ways to divert, ways to capture, use it, keep it on the land rather than just having it run off. But I also wanted to note that we're in the process of passing House Bill 1236. This was one of Representative Melly Carroll's bills, and it deals with persons with disabilities, enabling them to better access funds, Medicaid funds, and be more independent. And so it was her bill, and so we are naming it in her honor, and I expect it to go up to the governor by the time conference is over.
Oh, that's very nice.
Okay, and for all of you students who participated in voting on a state instrument, I'll let you know that the Governor Ige has signed that bill as Act 6, and the Awana instrument is the ukulele, and the Kahiko instrument is the pahudran.
Very good.
Very
Congratulations
nice.
to all the students who weighed
Yes,
in.
thank you.
Very nice. Senator English, would you like to mention anything?
No, well, I mean, we've covered quite a bit in this episode. I have to say that we may have a state mammal pretty soon as
The
well.
Hori Bat?
The Hori Bat bill is moving in the House as well.
Well,
so
it actually is going to move because it's got a good date and it's coming back over.
it's coming, okay, so we may have the state mammal as well.
Very nice, very nice. Senators,
Yes, if bills come back to us with clean dates and we like what the House has done to them, we can agree and they don't have to go to conference. So
They go straight up to the
I've been
governor.
able to agree to, or prepare to agree to about half a dozen, so I like that.
That simplifies things.
Yes, it does.
Senators, thank you again so much for your time. We really appreciate it. And thank you everyone for joining us on this episode of MauiManao. Aloha and mahalo.
you.